Well, welcome. It's Rachelle with Best Choice Realty. Thanks for jumping on our webinar Monday night. We are very fortunate to have Nikki Dutton with us. And we were talking actually last Monday, and she was giving me all kinds of tips and tricks to get buyers off the fence. When we're talking about marketing, why are we not owning? So we're going to be talking for the next 30 minutes about some strategies that we were talking about last Monday. And I thought, we could record this too, Nikki. She wants me to do podcasting. I'm like, I'm not doing podcasting. But what I can do is we can get good information out to all of you and get some more deals. That's what everybody's looking for, is how do we get buyers off the fence? How do we get, and some of these buyers are renting right now, and they're actually they're spending a lot more in rent when they actually should be looking at some great opportunities. So I'm going to turn it over to Nikki. She does have a presentation, and hopefully, Nikki, you allow me just to jump in and speak up, but you can take over.
I mean, it's the future of our podcasting career. Make some noise if you think Rachelle should start a podcast. All right, so let's just, my name is Nikki Dutton. I am a branch manager at Cross Country Mortgage. I own my own little teeny franchise called Rosewood Dutton Group. And when you support me, you're supporting a Black woman-owned business. So thank you very much. And I'm happy to share about renting versus owning. Please continue. So just starting out with what the considerations are when we're looking at clients who are like, I don't know, I don't think I want to buy right away. It's usually one of the four things that I've mentioned here. And let me know if you hear other things, but home prices is usually a concern, or that in combination with mortgage rates, as it mostly is about how much someone is going to have to pay per month to live when they're thinking in that mindset of being a homeowner. However, they're actually thinking like a renter. So we're going to help them transition from thinking like renters. Another very valid concern is inventory, which is, I remember when I was a renter and I was thinking about buying, and still to this day as a homeowner, when I'm like, if I'm going to spend $1.5 million on a house, it's going to have to at least be 3,500 square feet, where, that could be somebody else's conversation of, oh my goodness, if I'm going to spend $700,000 for a house, that house better be 4,000 square feet, have a yard, picket fence, whatever. Like all of the wish lists for the fact that they're going to have to pay $6,000, $6,500 a month to be able to purchase that. Anything you wanted to throw in there, Rachelle, Candace?
No, this is good. I mean, these are the four objections I think on the screen here that we're hearing a lot of right now. If you're working with buyers, they're complaining about home prices, they're complaining about mortgage rates, the inventory, and the economic uncertainty. So if I'm looking at the slide, Nikki, I'm thinking, how do I have some speaking points? Do I have some notes on, like, how do I talk to these things? You don't want to fall into their trap. You almost have to kind of spin the narrative, turn it around, because on all four of these things, we have buyers that are actually taking advantage of the prices. They're actually using, some buy downs and some other interesting negotiation tactics. Inventory is going to continuously be a challenge, especially if we're going to do what we're going to do over the next few months. And then the economic uncertainty is like that in many cycles that we go through. So I think if you dwell too much on this, Nikki, you're going to have issues, and I think we need to get ahead of it and come up with some scripting around some of these things. So I know you're talking about later.
Definitely. Actually, go back one slide. So forward one slide. So just given that I'm not talking about economic uncertainty in this particular PowerPoint deck, I do want to talk about it, because what causes home crashes, or economic crashes or whatever in the housing market, which really when they're talking about economic uncertainty, most of it has to do with, is the housing market going to crash, or is blah 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 la 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 about housing market, and referencing 2008 da da da. Not to minimize that time. I mean, I just heard myself minimize it because I hear people say it all the time and I rebut it constantly. But what it has to do, when we look back at 2008 or the housing crash that happened in that time, it had to do with bad loans being written and people not being able to pay their loans as they were coming due to pay normal payments. They were being qualified based on a credit score and a pulse. So when that was the case, and I always reference The Big Short because it didn't make sense for people to be able, like, people are in business to make money. There's no such thing as a workable business if people aren't going to get paid. And when it came down to it, the people that were writing those bad loans eventually wanted to get paid. But who was going to pay them was the people that didn't have any money because they were writing them loans based off of having a credit score and a pulse. So when that happened, people couldn't pay their mortgages, then they said, hey, I have to sell this house. And once this person was selling and the next person was selling and value started to go down, now you have mortgages that have a higher balance than what you were trying to sell it for, and that caused foreclosures. So keeping this short and sweet, and I mean, I'm sure you can figure that foreclosures further causes housing prices to dive, because it's like, just that's how we compare how much homes are sold for, is what's sold for right next to it. So when looking right here and right now, number one, there's an inventory shortage. So we're right back to supply and demand. So keeping in mind that there was about $4 trillion of mortgages that were refinanced in 2020 and 2021 that are below a 3% interest rate. And those people, such as myself, I'm not selling my house ever. Like, someone's going to have to pry this mortgage out of my cold, dead fingers. I'll rent it, but I'm not selling it. And that, I think, summarizes the inventory shortage that we have, is because people don't want to sell their mortgages, or they don't want to sell their mortgages. They don't want to sell their house that has their cheap interest rate attached to it. So that will cause a housing shortage. And since there are more buyers than there are homes to buy, we're not going to have a housing shortage. And just in case someone couldn't pay their mortgage because they got laid off, they're sitting on 50% equity nationwide. So they're not going to have a hard time selling their house because they'll be one of 50 people that don't have to sell their house, and there'll probably be 17 offers on it. So there you go. There is an impromptu education on why there's not going to be a housing crash or economic uncertainty. Now let's move forward and learn how to transition the mindset of renters thinking, oh, well, I don't want to have to increase my mortgage payment from $3,000 to $4,000 for a smaller house. Now,
So
logically speaking,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I said, so what do you say? Is this the slide that you logically speaking?
Yeah.
You have to your bullet points.
Yeah. So these are just some things, because I like to lead with logic. So if a person has to pay, they have to pay for their house, the roof over their head. Correct? It's like, unless you're living with your mom or you have some sweet deal where you don't have to pay any money, then you're going to have to make a payment to live somewhere. So another thing that we share with people is that you want to invest early in a high yield savings account for maximum compound appreciation. I'm sure everyone's heard that about having your kids when they're in grade school start savings accounts or high yield savings accounts. I don't know if I'm not a baby boomer, but I'm almost. But what are those passbook savings accounts that the ladies used to come into the bank with? It's like they started with $100 and now they're worth $500,000. But that's exaggeration. But everyone knows that concept of compound appreciation. So the sooner you buy, the better. Flat. Now, real estate is a leveraged investment, and I'm going to talk more about that in future slides. There are tax benefits that come with being a homeowner because that mortgage interest is a direct write-off against your income. Actually, consult your tax advisor on that. I don't know if I'm speaking correctly, but I do know that mortgage interest written off is beneficial if you are itemizing your return. And then you want to think about what's your return on investment if you're paying $3,000 a month in rent or $3,500 in rent. Rachelle, anything else before we move to the next slide?
No, that's good. Those are great bullet points. Shannon, did you have something to say?
No, let's keep going.
All right, next slide. Okay, so here is a data set. Here I am, home buyer. I have $30,000 to invest. Should I put that in the S&P 500 that has a 20-year average return on investment of 8.91%? I mean, that sounds pretty stinking high. Or should I put my $30,000 into buying a house? If I buy a house that is a $600,000 house, I could put 5% down, which is that's $30,000 is 5% of a $600,000 house. I'm going to be paying 7% interest rate. And I plan to live in the home have the house for at least 9 years. So that's like, okay, let me think about this. 5%. Okay, so if the home appreciation is 5.77%, but the interest rate is 7%, I don't see how that could necessarily pencil. But let's move forward to assess what it is to have a leveraged investment. So this is something that people don't often consider when they're balking at mortgage payments. They're not thinking about that rent increases. And I put in a factor of 4.5% of rental increase year over year, which if we're looking at national average, it sometimes is somewhere between 4.5% to 6%. So this is being conservative. So if we're paying $3,400 a month in year one, year 5, that's going to be a $4,055 rent payment. In year 9, that's going to be a $4,800 rent payment. So that part is not often considered when should I continue renting or not. And how many of you know people that have been renting for 9 years?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And they might continue to rent for 9 years because they haven't seen this type of way the numbers lay out. They've never had somebody sit there and explain this to them, or they've never had a mom or a dad that's explained what financial literacy is all about, or spent some time with a lender like Nikki. I mean, this is the kind of thing that when she and I were talking about, I was like, we need to get this out to all of you so you can continue to share this news with people. I don't think people realize that it could be a very good investment for them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's looking down at the estimated expenses. When you look at year 9, the mortgage payment is $32 delta from the rent. So that is like, oh, when you're thinking about the cash flow, and this isn't even getting to year 10 through 30, where it's a big gaping cash flow difference going the other way pointed towards mortgage payments. And that's also too where you can talk to clients sidebar about protection against homelessness. Like owning a home can protect you from being homeless. And that's when you're looking at people who are elderly who have their homes that they own free and clear, or they have these teeny tiny mortgage payments. Back 30 years ago, those mortgage payments weren't teeny tiny. They were significant up against their income. But when we look forward, 25 years, having a mortgage payment that's $5,000 or $3,000 is going to sound like pennies up against people who are paying $10,000 a month in rent. Now,
that's true.
Now, moving forward a slide, let's see some more data. Holy moly. Okay, so people oftentimes don't think about those rent numbers at large scale. They're just thinking about the monthly. Here, looking at an annual rent increase of 4.5%, that's almost $450,000 in rent that's gone to pay somebody else's mortgage. Even if people are living in a big apartment building, someone owns that apartment building and it's the same mortgage process. It's like, okay, someone bought that apartment building with a mortgage. You're paying their mortgage by living in that apartment unit. You're paying somebody else's mortgage flat out.
Or
There's no way
or
you're
their
not.
salary for that matter.
All of the above. Somebody else is gaining equity, creating legacy wealth for their family, eating out of a silver spoon while you're throwing your money down the drain. This is the biggest cause of the wealth gap here in the United States. Now, if you see those numbers like, oh, well, I would have saved money, all things considered, if I did rent, looking at that cash flow difference over a 9-year period. Move forward a slide. However, you're not considering every single time you make your mortgage payment, you're paying down the principal balance of your mortgage. So if you see there on the right, there's that amortization gain. That means you've paid down $70,018 of your mortgage over that 9-year period. You also have, looking at historical average, which is 70 years of data, and this is different by zip code, by the way. So this can be customized for where your client is purchasing. If they're purchasing in Tacoma, it could be more. It could be, more or less in White Center. It could be more or less in Bellevue, et cetera. This is not looking at national averages. It's specific to zip code. And this is my zip code, 5.77 historical appreciation, which I feel 70 years of history tells more truth than any type of forecast where we're guessing what's going to happen in the future.
Right.
I like to use history. So this is factoring an appreciation gain, which is how much your house has increased in value, how much equity you've grown simply by holding on to that piece of dirt with the house on it, is $394,033. You've paid down the balance of your mortgage, $70,000. Yes, we're factoring in the cash flow difference of renting versus owning those mortgage payments over a 9-year period. We are looking at a tax benefit available. We are factoring in the closing costs. So we're not here like trying to blow smoke up anyone's tail. Like, we're looking at responsibly to count everything, including the cost to sell, where we're paying real estate agents 2.5% for the listing agent and 2.5% for the buyer's agent. All those things considered, you are still coming out a net gain of $356,072 looking at a 9-year period. And those numbers exponentially grow when you start looking at years 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 through 30. It's extraordinary. But just looking realistically, there's a 9-year. So looking at a 9-year ROI on $30,000, if you were to put it in this S&P 500, which has a 20-year average of 8.91%, that 30 years in, or $30,000 in 9 years, you would get $64,620.78 out, which is pretty good. It's 115% return on investment, or 8.91% a year. Now, putting that into the house, it isn't just the $30,000 that's appreciating, it's the $600,000 house. And that's the power of a leveraged asset. Because I can say, hey, I want to have $600,000 appreciating, and I'm going to give you $30,000 to be able to have all of that appreciation over the next however long I want to keep the asset. And I'll pay this mortgage, blah, blah, blah. So you're like, okay, great. Well, if that home is valued at $994,000 in 9 years, after all of the expenses and factoring the cash flow difference, you come out at $356,000.72 as your cash return on that $30,000 investment. So let's look, comparing those numbers. Move forward.
Love it.
So we're looking at the S&P 500 ROI, doing the math, 115%, $34,000 gain. Move forward. Now, this is so cray-cray. you have 1,086% ROI. Call it 1,087% if you're rounding up. Return on investment. Or if you annualize that, that is 31.64% a year. So tell me where you can put in $30,000 and get a compound appreciation of 31%.
Nothing that I know.
I don't know of it.
This
And
is
so-
like, yeah, that's the power of leveraged investment, growing your wealth through real estate. Rachelle, you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, I think that you brought up some good points. I think that the slide right before where it talked about how much the investment, $30,000, it's interesting because people don't realize, I think maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but 90% of buyers think they still have to put 20% down on a house. Is that correct? Is that number accurate? Or
Call it accurate. I mean, who cares? Most people do think that. So yeah, call it 90%.
So that's what I usually say. And then I get them in touch with a lender who can kind of go over the strategy behind home ownership. And this is very compelling. This gets people excited about if this is possible. So I just have to save up $30,000 to invest, Nikki, for a house of this 600,000.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's so I mean, that's not the only part of the story. It also too is your ability to repay. But I mean, typically, I mean, we'll have to figure it out. But this is just showing a person the power of investing in home ownership rather than letting your money sit in their bank account if they have any, or if they do. Here's also the amazing part is that the less you put in, the higher your return on investment is.
Right.
So like buy a house with FHA, put 3.5% down, see what your return on investment is.
Right.
It's tremendous because the asset appreciates at the same rate.
Mm-hmm.
People who are buying at 0% down or using down payment assistance, it's like that for me is why I'm so passionate about everyone being able to get their piece of the pie. Everyone, and I'm sure everyone on this call has their own story, but it's like I'm still living with having a 78-year-old mother who never purchased any property and is really in a demoralizing situation where she's counting on myself and my sister to support her because she gets $886 a month from Social Security. And we have to supplement that. And there are a lot of people that were not educated about this, myself included. I didn't buy a house until I was 37. I rented for 14 years, being in this industry since 2001. Just it's like it's conversations, it's concepts, it's like having a grasp of this conversation right here.
That's good.
Yeah. So there is a summary of the data sets. I don't really think I have to say more about this.
No, but might want to take a screen capture of that. That's good if you're talking about, talking with somebody about a scenario. I mean, we're not lenders, but we get asked a lot, what's the difference? Should I invest in this or that? I have teenagers in my house that are asking about that right now, and it's like educating even your kids at home. And as they start to get into their 20s, that this is the reason you want to save. It's because you want to have the amount to invest in something like this and a safer investment, and diversifying your assets.
Mm-hmm. And also considering going back to the beginning, everyone has to pay for the roof over their head. So if you have to pay to live, you might as well grow your wealth like all the smart people have in the United States.
So they put an article, Nikki, we were talking about that last week, and you come back to that. It was New York Times, right? Put out an article about.
It was the Wall Street Journal.
Was it? Okay.
Oh no, it was either Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. Now I can't remember, but search it, you'll find it. But they put out a calculator saying that over a 9-year or 10-year period, that renting versus owning, they'd be better off renting. They'd save $113,000. And that had to do with just data sets that were wrong. Like saying using a national average of appreciation of 3%. So
It was like one
Right.
example of the media getting it wrong, creating a cycle, and it was so frustrating. Nikki and I were talking about it, and we're like, you need to jump on a webinar and like, let's just at least look at some local numbers and some local, data sets that make sense based on factors that she and I were talking about. So this was really well done. So if I had a question from somebody else on the call that just came through the chat, they're like, how do we get like a customized, buy versus rent? Is that something you could offer one of our agents?
Take a screen capture of this slide right here.
Okay.
Would you like a customized buy versus rent with ROI? Please send your
Maybe.
request to nikki@rosewooddutton.com and provide me with these 4 pieces of data: current rent, purchase price, down payment, city or zip code for the custom appreciation data.
Okay, good.
Look how that just flowed right in with the conversation.
Funny. Are
You
there other
guys
questions?
don't hesitate to ask me. You can blow me up with these requests. They take about 30 seconds for me to produce.
Nice.
So
This
if
is
you
great.
have like 35 clients you want to make rent versus own, send me those 4 pieces of data for the 35 and I'll make them for you.
Great conversations too. To be
Yeah.
had. That's wonderful.
Yep. And you can even take this PowerPoint, just don't give it to your other lender partners. I made it from scratch. It's not the facts are the facts, but the conversation is mine. And someone else can come up with a conversation. Just my point is you can have the deck. Just please don't like, oh hey, you should change this with your branding on it. I said I'm independent business over here. You feel me? Like Rachelle Will Height.
No, this is great. And it's good to have the information out to more people. Questions out there in the group? Candace, did you have some questions? I thought this was very timely. A lot of people
Didn't have any questions, but I mean, I've just been seeing a lot of this, and it takes me back to, it's like choose your heart. I saw a post and it said you can have lower mortgage interest rates, or lower home prices, but you won't have both. And I'm like, yeah. So choose your heart, right? Because if you want to wait for interest rates to go down, guess what else is going to happen when they go down? Home prices are going to go up. So,
right.
yeah.
Here's the logic around that as well. Everyone is, I have about 700 pre-approved buyers right now that cannot afford to buy. So, or their numbers don't line up with their basic needs to be able to purchase. But when interest rates go down 1%, 350 of them will be able to go out to market immediately. So that's just looking inside of my one person's database for interest rates that have been on the rise for a year and a half, 2 years. So that's one. You can amplify that by as many successful loan officers are out there. So it's like, do you want, another million buyers on the market competing with you? And that's how interest rates, or that's how home prices skyrocket, is when you have more competition. All you need to have a bidding war is one other person that wants to buy the house that you want.
And then your prices increase, and then you're dealing with appraisals not coming at value, and it's just people are overpaying, so that it's a cycle. So it's better to do it now. Get them off the fence now and get out there in the Memorial Day weekend. It should be a very busy weekend for us with the rates dropping down. They did drop down over the weekend. I saw movement on a lot of listings. We've been very busy in the office. This will probably be one of our best Mays that we've had. And exciting times are ahead for us. So very much appreciate your thoughts, Nikki, on putting this all together. We're right at the 6 o'clock. Thank you so much for your time and effort in putting this together. I know I've already got a few thank yous personally.
My
Can I have a quick
pleasure.
question?
Oh, yes, please.
Oh, yeah. Like I have a client is because they have the lower interest rate. So it's hard for them to give up to buy a new one. So how can I tell them, convince them?
Well, it really has to be I speak to people. Well, I don't know. Rachelle, do you want to go to answer this question first? I can answer, but do you want to go
No, go
first?
ahead. No, go ahead. I'd love
Okay.
to hear. Okay.
My honest opinion is what is best for the client. So if they
Mhm.
have a life event where it's necessary for them to move, and that could be if they had a baby or, expanded family, maybe someone needs to move into their house, maybe, for whatever reason, maybe they got a an increase in pay and now they can afford more and they want to have a home that matches that lifestyle change.
Yeah, they
Then,
just don't want to give up the lower interest they have. They
well,
are
then tell them
having.
to rent out their property and then go buy something else.
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay.
That's a good way. I
I-
mean, it makes sense to rent that property. Hopefully the property is in good condition and would be a good property. Some people don't realize how much the rental rates are, how much they can actually
Mhm.
get in their home. That could be a
Right.
very
Okay.
viable option. And then
Yeah.
they can pay that down. I had a client who even bought their home. They kept their investment, kept their home, and they basically rented it out to their 20 something children and established them
Okay.
as homeowners and then built it into their estate planning. So I'm not sure if they
Mhm.
have your legacy, but there's ways to structure it that way too, where it's like, okay, turn it into a living trust,
Okay.
the asset that they have at a low interest rate, and then let's get pre-approved to buy another place, and put a down
Mhm.
payment and actually grow wealth that way too. So there's some
Mhm.
different ways you can think about it.
There's a lot of different ways, Rachelle. I like how you said that because we're not in the business of talking anybody into anything. What we're in the business to do is provide life solutions
Mhm.
in the relationship to real estate. So find out the why, what made them think about it in the first place, Rachel,
Mhm.
and then
Mhm.
work backwards from that.
It's great.
Okay.
And
Okay.
Nikki's coming from a place of heart. We're not going to force
Yep.
them to their low
Yeah.
interest. I got a low interest rate too. And that makes me, but you know what? At some point, I'm going to want to probably trade up and do something different. And you just have to be ready to answer their questions and really guide them through that process.
Yeah,
You
I
know?
think
Mhm.
that's also an opportunity for you to be their champion and the expert, and also for yourself to get grounded and what are your values regarding real estate. And my values are buy and never sell. Buy, it's like
Mhm.
the first house you buy is the last one that you sell, or it's like I don't plan to have necessarily more than 5 properties, but I certainly wouldn't start selling until I had at least 5. And that's I don't know, Candace can speak to that as well. She's living example of that. Candace?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all relative to what the end goal is. And I like how Virginia positioned it. It's like what got them interested in making some kind of move. Tie it into that pain, that feeling, whatever it is, there's some
Mhm.
reason that they're thinking about doing something different. And if we can dive into that and then just provide some options, it's not always going to be the solution, but options and share stories, share information, share that, a lot of us have started and have
Yeah.
5 properties and continue. Like, yeah, interest rates are amazing. On on a few of my properties and absolutely going to hold on to those for a long time, right? But
Mhm.
there are other moves that I still want to make and that I need to be made. So it's like, okay, how can I make this work? How can I
Mm.
make this work? Yeah.
Mhm. And I think having a high level conversation over the financial piece of it is important, because it is like, what would that look like if you were to rent it out? What would that look like if you were to sell?
Yeah.
What is your financial position? What's your plan
Yeah.
for the next 15 years? Things, those types of conversations, so that they can, again, one of my values is helping first time home buyers transition out of thinking like renters. So that could also be first time move up buyers the same way, as thinking, oh, I have to get rid of this mortgage to get that one. But is that the case? Or do you
Right.
have more resources? Like, could you potentially do a bridge to or cross collateralize in order to be able to move up with a low down payment.
Yep, exactly.
That's good. Hopefully that was helpful. Any other
Yes,
questions?
thank you. Mhm.
Tips to get lower interest rates. What do you think about that, Nikki?
I like to leverage the power of temporary buy downs. I think that's the biggest bang for your buck right now. And being able to structure your offer in a way that you can take advantage of temporary buy downs is very important. So that includes your lender and realtor strategizing together on how that offer is going to be presented, even if it is somewhat competitive. You can potentially build in. So let me take one step back. How temporary buy downs work is you get a seller credit for a sum of money, and that sum directly goes to reducing the interest rate for the client for the first 1, 2, or 3 years. And there's about 7 different options in there for them to choose. The most common one used is what's called the 2-1 buy down, which means it's 2% off the interest rate year 1 and 1% off the interest rate year 2. So figuring out, okay, does it cost $13,000 for this? How do we structure this offer so that we can get that temporary buy down for the client so they can get a better interest rate for the next couple years, which is the forecasted amount of time for us to be getting down to interest rates that are more manageable for clients' budgets.
Awesome. Hopefully that answered that question. Shannon, anything else from you? That's it for my chat.
Yeah, nothing that I've gotten differently. I think we answered most of the questions that I had. So thank you, Nikki.
Thank you
It's
so
my
much.
pleasure. If this has been valuable and worth your time, I would definitely appreciate the opportunity to grow a relationship with you and the opportunity to pre-approve your next buyer.
All right. Thanks so much, Nikki. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Nikki.